Uh, all right. So, like I say, I'm going to now lead into some evidence that actually Matthew is doing even more hardcore literary work. And he's using a strategy that's well known in Greco-Roman literature and also in more modern literature, having little indications of callbacks from one point in the story to the other. And one of the little things that people probably forget because it seems so much an aside, it doesn't have much relevance to the plot, but if you read the four canonical gospels, there's the trial with Pilate, but only in Matthew do we actually, find out that Pilate is married and his wife is around. Because she basically pops in and says, hey, maybe you shouldn't bother this guy. I had a dream about this. Matthew's also the big person, like the only big author who's really big on this whole dream element. It's kind of obvious where it starts with Joseph, Jesus' father, that he gets multiple dreams. And of course, one can't help but parallel that with the patriarch Joseph, the interpreter of dreams. And of course, Joseph in the nativity story goes to Egypt, just like the other Joseph. So it's like, again, lots of obvious parallelism. So that he's an interpreter of dreams is interesting. The Magi also get dreams. They are also told in a dream to basically not stick around and go a different way back home because of how angry Herod was going to be. And you don't hear anything else about people getting dreams until just about at the end of the story in the basically the trial scenes and Pilate's wife coming in saying, hey, I had a dream about this. So this is like some indication, hey, when was the last time dreams came up? Oh, that was a while ago, wasn't that? It's some sort of callback. And that's not the only example of a callback. And when I say callback, the more technical term is an inclusio, like a particular word or phrase or theme that basically helps indicate that something is being repeated or being alluded to again later on. And the other inclusio that's usually seen somewhat obvious is at the beginning of the story of Jesus, we are told in that prophecy that he will be called Emmanuel. And you have to say, well, when's the next time Jesus is called Emmanuel? How many other times does that show up? Well, if you're checking, he's called Jesus a bunch of times, but he's never called Emmanuel again. But there is something else worth noting. When Matthew cites that prophecy and says his name will be Emmanuel, he then says, and what Emmanuel means is God will be with us. God is with us. What is Jesus' last statements before he leaves for the heavens? I am with you always. The end is calling back to the beginning. And as I've mentioned before, the Magi are bringing gifts of myrrh, which is used for embalming corpses. So again, it looks like there's these multiple indications that there's something going on at the end of the story that's parallel to the beginning, or vice versa. And like I say, some of these are maybe small touches, small word choices here and there. But even more grandly, we can actually see many examples of the beginning and end very purposely seeming to parallel each other. So for example, Jesus is called the King of the Jews, and this is actually first stated by Gentiles. The first people to call Jesus the King of the Jews are the Magi. The next time Jesus gets called King of the Jews is by Pilate. In the middle, no one else is calling Jesus King of the Jews. So Gentiles at the beginning and at the end using that title for Jesus. Jesus' enemies assemble together to plot against him. And again, using the same Greek word in both cases. The scribes and priests are assembling together. In the first case, they are assembling together with Herod to basically figure out, where the Messiah is supposed to be born. And later in chapter 28, they're assembling together to figure out what lie are they going to tell about the empty tomb. Again, plotting together to ultimately take down the Messiah. And even using the same term for that assembling together. Also, at the beginning and the end, there are bright lights that are standing on or upon structures. And again, using a very similar, the same Greek word and grammatical structure. In Matthew 2:9, it's a star that stops and stands over the house that Jesus is in. In the empty tomb story, it's an angel that opens up the tomb and then sits upon the opened door. Again, using that same structure, and the angel is said to be very luminescent, very bright. So two bright objects doing the same thing with the same kinds of terminology. Already, again, interesting parallelism. It gets even more dense when we are looking for the search for Jesus. In the beginning, it's the Magi who are searching for Jesus. At the empty tomb story, it's the women who are looking for their Jesus. And in both cases, when they find their Jesus, they are filled with joy. They are both following instructions, using the same terminology there. And in both cases, when the Magi and when the women find Jesus, they get down and prostrate themselves to Jesus. And again, using the same terminology. Again, seeing these parallels in both cases over and over and over again. And lastly, the whole point of the Magi is the fact that they are Gentiles. And what's the Great Commission happening at the very end? Make disciples of all nations. Go out to the non-Jews and also bring them into the next super nation or kingdom of God, I should say. So lots and lots of purposeful parallelism between the beginning and the end. One is being used to help structure the other. And this, again, looks like literary craftsmanship, not just random things being put together.
Mm-hmm.
So when come Christmas time and you're looking at your creche, the story is supposed to be about the birth. But what I would say is when you're looking at this story, what Matthew is really wanting you to look forward to is what happens at the end of the story as well, which of course is even the most important for Matthew. So when you're thinking about Christmas, you should also be thinking about Easter. So I say celebrate both holidays at once. It's what Matthew might have intended you to do. That's the big presentation for today. Thank you.
Wow, that was really fun. You got me thinking of that nativity art. I don't know who drew it, but there's like the scene with Jesus in the cradle there as an infant, and there's like a crucifix in the corner hanging up, and it's like, hey, spoiler, hey, it's about his death, and of course his overcoming death is the whole notion. I'm trying to find it on Google. I figured I'd share it to give people a laugh.
Yeah, I think there's also a Da Vinci painting as well with Jesus and John the Baptist, and I think Jesus is like holding a cross or like a stick cross in his hand as well, so he's contemplating his future. And of course, as everyone else is like, hey, dude, spoilers.
It is. Someone had it and circled it. It was like, hey, we're letting you know. Which
I know the meme you're talking about.
Yeah, and it kind of tells you like it's really easy. We were talking about this earlier. Actually, James Apperson, he's in the chat right now. He's got a YouTube channel. Go subscribe if you really want to get part of the community and go check him out. Of course, subscribe to Dr. Aaron Adair. I pinned his YouTube to the top of the chat. Give us a 1. Again, if you enjoyed the presentation, give us a 1. If you didn't, throw a 2. Or if you're just like, I'm not a fan of this, or you have your disagreements, throw a 2 up. I want to hear what the chat thinks about the presentation. And so Dr. Adair's ego can get bigger and bigger.
Careful, because again, scientists, if the ego gets too large, it will collapse into a black hole, and then we're all in trouble.
This is true. So be mindful of that when you put your number out there so we can check you out in the chat. But we were talking about this earlier, and, we could easily see other religions when we're within one and find problems because it's not our own worldview, which is why the scientific method, I think, is so important to try and look for problems in your own stances. This is such a good methodology to have. But I'm looking at this and I'm going, well written, whoever you are, well written. And the clues are there from the beginning of this story. The most probable is that this is constructed as fiction, or at least to some degree historical fiction.
Yeah.
I can't say everything that is listed there didn't happen, but there's good reasons to say, should we think this written the way it is and what's said happened? You know what I mean?
Yeah. To abuse slightly a bit of a quote from George Lucas, when it comes to stories, the ones that come after, they're not identical, but they rhyme. Stories rhyme. History doesn't. History doesn't try to go out of its way and repeat itself in that same sort of highly structured way. So it's at the very least not what you would expect if it's just an account of things that happened.
You're not lying. This is what, like, big red flags are coming up. And I like the story. Like, can I not like the story? Can I not think, wow, this is cleverly written,
Yeah.
But we do not devise cleverly devised myths, as one of the later texts says. Maybe they
Right,
don't agree
right.
with Matthew. I don't know.
Or maybe they didn't think it was all that clever.
Right. I have
Because
questions.
yeah, I will note one point though, that it's also worth noting the human stuff here. And while I've shown how good Matthew is as a writer, he also of course makes flubs. Probably the
Mhm.
most obvious flub is he didn't count correctly. I mentioned those 3 sets of 14. If you go through and you count, you get 14, 14, 13.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Casper the Friendly Descendant. That's what they forgot. Absolutely. Let's get to Q&A, and then if we don't cover the questions I have, we'll spend my time at the end getting into those if we have the time. Sort of a half joke question. Thank you so much for the support. Do you think the first gospel of the infancy of Jesus Christ, written by high priest Joseph, sometimes called Caiaphas, was the first written account of Jesus' birth?